From Segway Security forces to the world's smallest and most ridiculous army, plus the most pitiful ancient Roman military unit in history. Here are the 10 most embarrassing armies. Number 10. Segway Security. One of the most embarrassing security forces of all time was back at the Beijing Olympics, when paramilitary police officers were given Segways to patrol the Olympic venues and to make sure there was no funny business going on. As reported by Bloomberg, China spent roughly $6.5 billion on the security for the Olympic Games, and some of this money must have obviously gone to the embarrassing idea of using Segways for safety. It's not exactly clear whose idea this was, but the result was hilarious. It's also been reported that much of the high-tech surveillance gear given to the Chinese security forces for the Beijing Olympics came from the United States. The Chinese allegedly spent 4 times what Athens spent on their security during the Games in 2004. And the big question, of course, is why would China need to spend so much money just for the Olympics? If they wanted to show off how technologically advanced they were, surely they could have come up with something better than policemen on Segways. Number 9. The Vatican City Guards. The Vatican's Swiss Guard has been ranked as one of the smallest and most embarrassing militaries in the world, primarily for the way that they're dressed. I mean, they look like court jesters from the Renaissance. The Vatican Guards are dressed in eccentric yellow and blue garb straight out of a live show from medieval times. But even though the dress is embarrassing, and even though it's funny to see the Vatican's army walking around with halberds instead of guns, they're apparently one of the most skilled armies on the planet. There are only 135 guards in the army, making it one of the smallest in the world. But they're apparently very well trained, as they're charged with an important task of protecting the Pope and the Apostolic Palace. The history of the Vatican City Guard is anything but embarrassing. 500 years ago, young men from Switzerland often traveled abroad and worked as mercenaries. Swiss mercenaries were some of the best in the business, especially in the Renaissance back in the 1500s. In 1506, Pope Julius II established what would come to be known as the Pontifical Swiss Guard, and it's still in operation today, making it one of the oldest military units today in continuous operation. But what's really weird is that the Vatican Army is made up of Swiss citizens, even though the Vatican is technically in Italy. Each candidate must be a single male of Swiss citizenship, they must stand at least 5 foot 8 inches, and they have to be between the ages of 19 and 30. And of course, each applicant must be a devout Roman Catholic and endorsed by their local priest. Number 8. The St. Kitts and Nevis Defense Force. The St. Kitts and Nevis Defense Force consists of a small infantry unit, a small maritime unit, and only about 300 personnel divided between the two, with a small corps of only 150 cadets. With their tiny size, this is one of the smallest defense forces in the world, and embarrassing only because of its lack of members. But considering St. Kitts and Nevis is not really a big player on the world stage, it's no surprise that they have a small military. They don't have a very large population either. The primary mission of their defense force is simply to work with local police to keep citizens safe, while the Coast Guard patrols the territorial waters. Plus, the St. Kitts and Nevis Defense Force is used whenever there's a national disaster, and this is extremely important. They also sometimes play a role in overseas peacekeeping operations. The defense force on this small island nation was formed in 1896 as a volunteer fighting service in response to riots that happened at some local sugar plantations. But it wouldn't be until 1967 that the defense force became official. A regular army was needed only after some public disturbances on the island of Anguilla, after the island tried to secede from St. Kitts and Nevis and the volunteer force was poorly trained to deal with the situation. Have you ever seen one of these bizarre tiny police forces or armies? What did you think? Could you and a few friends take over one of these places? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Then remember to subscribe to American Eye if you haven't already. More videos are coming out soon and you won't want to miss them. Number 7. Costa Rica's No Army. Costa Rica arguably has the most embarrassing army in the world because they have no army at all. This might seem strange considering where Costa Rica is located. This small and peaceful country is in the middle of Central America, where countries like Guatemala and El Salvador struggle with some of the worst violence and poverty in the entire world. Even Panama is notorious for corruption and money laundering. But Costa Rica gets by just fine with a fairly stable political system and a relatively prosperous economic system. They also have absolutely no army, and it's been like that for 70 years. It all started in 1948, when Defense Minister Edgar Cardona put forth the idea that it would be smarter to spend more money on education and health rather than a military. Well, the idea worked, and the change led to a huge advancement in Costa Rican society. Without an army, the standard of living drastically went up during the 50s and 60s. More hospitals were built, and there was a huge boost in education that allowed people in the country to get better jobs and to increase their own economy. Believe it or not, Costa Rica has a 98% literacy rate according to the 2016 and 2017 Global Competitiveness Report. They offer their citizens universal healthcare, and the World Health Organization has ranked Costa Rica as having the 36th best healthcare in the world and the best in Central America. And all of this without an army. So is Costa Rica's lack of an army embarrassing, or so advanced that other nations can't even fathom it? Probably the latter. Number 6. Missing Navy of Mongolia. Mongolia is the most landlocked nation in the world. Its borders are farther from the nearest coastline than any other nation in terms of size, and it is the second biggest landlocked country next to Kazakhstan. The only international water border in Mongolia is a couple miles long, and it stretches along a small piece of lake in the northeastern part of the country, where Mongolia touches Russia. Because of all this, there's really no reason for Mongolia to have a navy. They don't have very many big lakes, there's really nothing for them to patrol, and to have a navy at all would be completely ridiculous. Yet Mongolia definitely has a navy. Is it embarrassing? Yes, it is absolutely embarrassing. Perhaps the most embarrassing part about Mongolia's navy, which by the way operates primarily on Lake Khovsgol, far from any border and far from any possible military action, is the reason it exists at all. It's what you'd call a token navy, a result of Mongolia trying to keep their lost heritage alive. 800 years ago, Kublai Khan led the greatest empire of the Mongols, and they had the largest navy in the entire world, with ships throughout the lakes and rivers of Eastern Europe and Central Asia, with a heavy military presence in the Sea of Japan, the East China Sea, the South China Sea, the Arabian Sea, and even the Persian Gulf. In the 13th century, Genghis Khan even attacked Japan with a force of 4,000 ships. But alas, it's ancient history. Mongolia is now a small nation with a miserable navy of just a couple of boats sitting uselessly on a pretty small lake. Number 5. The Roman 9th Legion. The Roman army was a force to be reckoned with. But one of the most embarrassing stories of the Roman army has to do with the Roman Britain and the mysterious disappearance of the 9th Legion. So far as the story goes, 5,000 of Rome's best soldiers marched into Caledonia in ancient England and were never seen again. But how did this happen? Apparently, the Roman soldiers became lost in a swirling mist and were destroyed by a disadvantaged group of British warriors who used their home terrain to their advantage. These were 5,000 of the best trained warriors, and they lost in an embarrassing defeat to the untrained British. The story's been popular in both England and Scotland as a kind of inspirational tale. It's given the Brits and the Scots a sense of national pride, beating back the ferocious Romans. But just wait, because this story might be embarrassing for everyone. According to the BBC, historians say that the story of the 9th Legion is extremely exaggerated, saying that the Legion was probably never attacked by anyone, but that they were transferred from northern England to the Middle East sometime around the year 160, where they were then wiped out by a group of Persians. Number 4. The AngloZanzibar War. The most embarrassing war in history was also the shortest war in history. It's known as the AngloZanzibar War of 1896, and it lasted a grand total of only 38 minutes. The war started when a treaty was signed between Britain and Germany in 1890, in which Zanzibar was given British influence and Tanzania was given to the Germans. Britain immediately declared Zanzibar a protectorate of the British Empire, and 3 years later, the ruler of the protectorate died suddenly inside of his palace and his cousin took over. The local British diplomats were not pleased with what happened, as they were sure that the former ruler had been poisoned by his cousin. There was then a brief fight between the British consulate and the murderous cousin, who had barricaded himself inside of the palace with a force of about 3,000 men and some cannons. Well, the British bombarded the palace with their warships in the harbor starting at 9:02 in the morning, and by 9:40, the war was over, the palace was destroyed, and the usurper's flag was taken down. Number 3. The Canadian military. While many people imagine Canada to be a peaceful and happy nation, it actually has one of the most embarrassing armies in the world, though not for the reason you may think. Yes, Canada has an extremely small army compared to many other nations, but the reason Canada's military is so embarrassing is that it's come under fire in recent years for reasons of scandals, violence, torture, and brutality, all within the army on Canadian soil. The abuse of Canadian soldiers inside the army was actually widespread throughout the 80s and 90s, according to many former military members who have come forward with the allegations. An investigation in 1984 even exposed that the participants in training exercises were literally tortured, and apparently it hasn't stopped. According to a recent report from the CBC, during escape and evasion courses designed to teach soldiers how to avoid capture and imprisonment by the enemy, trainees suffered waterboarding, sleep deprivation and starvation, regular beatings, electrical shocks, and many of them left the exercise with broken bones. A former military member who participated in these training exercises claimed that recruitment instructors would force their trainees to crawl across bathroom floors soaked in urine, and that they would make them stand outside naked in the rain after crawling through an open sewer before being brought into a tent where a female military officer would then make rude remarks about their private areas. Suffice it to say, these recent scandals have put the Canadian military in a rather embarrassing light, with many cadets leaving training already suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Number 2. The German military. According to the recent report from The Spectator, the German army has become a complete joke. Of course, there was a time when the German army could literally take on the world, but those times are long gone. The German military has become such an embarrassment that it was recently forced to ground all 53 of its Tiger helicopters after technical difficulties. Among European powers, Germany is arguably one of the weakest. Of course, between 1945 and 1990, there wasn't much that Germany could do about its military, seeing as it was restricted by foreign powers. Plus, Germany is under strict orders to keep its army personnel limited to only 370,000 people because of the country's bad behavior in the past. With such a long absence from the military stage, the might of Germany has become a joke. Their equipment is embarrassing, they don't have enough tanks or jets or transport helicopters, and most of their major machinery is usually tied up for maintenance and repair. In October of 2017, Germany even confirmed that none of their 6 submarines were in working condition. Number 1. The fall of France. One of the most embarrassing militaries in history is definitely the French military back in 1940. The French had had a long history of military successes until the 1900s. Then in World War II, their powerful army was reduced to basically nothing in just 6 weeks following the attack from Germany. The French even developed something known as the Maginot Line, which was a massive defensive line of trenches and fortifications that was supposed to keep Germany out of France in case of an attack. Well, on May 10, 1940, Germans hit Belgium and Holland. On the 28th, Belgium surrendered. 338,000 British troops escaped Dunkirk between May 26th and June 4th. The next day, Germany was on the move. France could do nothing to stop the German advancement, and by June 13th, Paris was finished. The first German troops entered Paris on June 14th. The panzer divisions raced across France and snuffed out all the small pockets of resistance, and the end was on June 22nd when France finally surrendered. But the final humiliation was when Hitler forced French representatives to sign the document of capitulation in the exact same railway carriage in which Germany was forced to complete their surrender previously in 1918. To this day, it was the ultimate embarrassment of France and their army. Which army do you think is the most embarrassing? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and come back soon for another awesome video right here on American Eye.